Welcome back to the Rocky Garza Show. I'm your host, Rocky Garza, and today we are looking at part 2 of the Great Life Myth. Now, if you're just checking this out, this is your first time joining us, I want to remind you, maybe go back and check out the last episode as we talked about the Great Life Myth part 1. It'll help today make a whole lot more sense. But before we jump in, I want to remind you, as always, if you are looking to see what we are up to, how to be involved, and how to join us for our next online event that we create specifically for you at no cost, go to rockygarza.com/beyond-success. Again, that's rockygarza.com/beyond-success, and you can check out everything that we're doing there, and we'd love to see you at our next event. As we get going today, again, we're looking at the Great Life Myth Part 2. And so to give us a very short recap of what we discovered in Part 1 is we were looking at this idea around the Great Life Myth, that there are all of these contingencies, all of these expectations, all the things we believe we are supposed to do, we need to do. If you even go back to a couple of episodes previous, the things we should do, many times we are unknowingly building a life that was not ours. We're unknowingly building a life that doesn't belong to us. We have all of these sort of pressures we have from family, friends, society, culture that says you need to do this and have this and be this. And if you can get more, do more, have more, then you, like me, could also be happy. As we unpack the Great Life Myth, we began to see that maybe there is a different way. Maybe other than just attempting to say we're going to find success, we believe we're going to create a light that goes beyond success. What does it look like for us to build a life that goes beyond success, beyond just the normal standard ways in which we're able to sort of say, I have arrived, I made it, I did it? What does it look like to build a life of deep conviction that we deeply believe in? So as we jump into part 2 today, that was our sort of recap from last time. Make sure and check that out if you haven't already. I want to jump straight in today and look at what are some of the ways in which the Great Life Myth has been created? Sort of what are some of the standard beliefs we're kind of all carrying at all times, that if we can begin to unpack and sort of rid ourselves of those, that allows us to begin to see life in a new way, and from a new angle, from a new place, and ideally giving us a new perspective about what life is, what it could be, what it might be, and how do we begin to move beyond success. And so we're going to start with some of these may seem very familiar to you. We're going to try to put a new spin on them if you've already heard them before. And for some of these things, we're sort of looking at them for the very first time. So as we unpack the Great Life Myth, what are some of the components, if you will, 4 key components that sort of built this myth, the foundational aspect that this myth was built on? What are some of those things? I think number one, it begins with chasing material wealth in hopes of deep fulfillment. Now, I know for many of us, we're not hearing that for the first time. And I even think for a lot of us listening, we would go, well, that's not me. I'm not chasing material wealth in hopes of ultimate fulfillment. It's just things, they don't matter, they're not that big of a deal. And yet, I believe for many of us, at varying degrees, the way in which you're choosing to purchase, the things you're choosing to spend your time on, the things you're choosing to give your energy to, all of those are either leading towards sort of this accumulation of material wealth in hopes of fulfillment. And I think because of that, oftentimes, we find ourselves sort of let down. We find ourselves with only this very, very temporal idea that if we could get enough money, enough possessions, enough things, that would be our main source of happiness. And I want to be very clear. I like things. I like nice things. I like fun things. I'm not in any way saying that the great life is only created if you can rid yourself of all the things you could ever possibly need or want. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But I think a key component we need to challenge ourselves with is, am I building a life where I have believed or I am believing that the accumulation of things will in fact fill the gaps and voids of fulfillment where I am looking? Now, the reason we have to rid ourselves of this first before we get into the idea of how do I even identify what would be fulfilling is I have found over the last decade or two that in order for us to put in positive things in our life, in order for us to build things we believe in, we must first rid ourselves of that in which does not serve us. And so this is an exercise of not necessarily telling you what you think or believe, rather challenging you to question yourself. And if there are elements of this that we can remove, I only believe that creates a greater opportunity for what is possible. Number one, the elimination of chasing material things in order of fulfillment. Number 2 of the great life myth, the idea that we can be fulfilled if we can find enough people to tell us that we are good. This overwhelming idea of seeking external validation. Don't get me wrong. I want for you to like me. I want for you to tell me that I am good. I want for you to tell me that I am valuable. I want for you to believe that I have the capacity to change and impact your life. But the pursuit of that overwhelmingly, I have spent a large portion of my life looking and seeing and hoping that if I could find enough of you to say yes to me, then that would give me the chance to say yes to me. Do you find yourself often looking in the mirror, hoping that if you could find enough people to tell you that you are good, then maybe in fact one day you believe that you are? And if so, I believe that is a massive part of the great life myth. The idea that we are only good when someone else says that we are, rather than the ability to know that we are in fact good. And that actually gives us the ability to show up fully as ourselves wherever we go. The second part or function of debunking the great life myth is the idea that external validation will in fact fulfill me. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, it will not. No matter how many people tell you how great you are, until you can actually see, feel, believe, and begin to understand and identify that greatness in your own language, it will always be temporal. It will always be built on somebody else's ability to say that you can. It'll always be built on somebody else's ability to say that you will, or you have, or you did. How long can we go? How long can you go hoping to find fulfillment based on the words and actions of everyone around you? And when will you be able to begin to see your worth and value? And the debunking or the unpacking of the great life myth is the beginning that allows us to say, my value and worth is not predicated on somebody else's ability to tell me that I am worthy and valuable. Does that mean that we don't care about others' connection or affirmation? Not at all. But that can't be the root of what makes us valuable. The third component of unpacking and debunking the great life myth is this idea of overwork, more, do, and ultimately the neglection of self. See, burnout comes with a neglection of self. Overworking comes with a neglection of self. Feeling tired, frustrated, and sick and tired of being sick and tired comes with a neglection of self. Yet so many of us, myself included, at times have believed that self-worth is selfish and therefore self-care is selfish. And the idea to be successful means to rid ourselves of all self. Yet how can you expect to create impact, change in someone else's life if there is no one there? I am not explicitly asking you to be overtly selfish. I'm asking you to be self-aware. I'm asking you to have self-understanding. I'm asking you to challenge the great life myth by beginning to realize that your desire to see, know, and understand yourself can be built out of a place that says, I want to impact others out of an overflow of who I am. We call that being of service. But many of us are stuck in the great life myth because we have confused service with sacrifice. And we believe that the loss of myself in hopes that you like me will somehow fulfill me. And unfortunately, I have yet to find a time or a place where that is true. The overworking, the doing more, the sacrificing of our health and our rest and our well-being for the sake of productivity, achievements, and accolades leaves you only feeling tired. Am I asking you to not work hard? No. Am I asking you to minimize your level of effort and energy? No. Am I saying that you don't have to put in work and practice to really get where you want to go? No. I am simply saying that the common denominator in all of those environments is you. The common denominator in all of your relationships is you. The common denominator in everything that you are facing that you have been unwilling to see, know, understand, and move past has been you. It's me. It's us. Often we are the problem, not because we are bad or broken, because we're looking for somebody else's vision of us to be fulfilling, rather than putting in the work required and necessary to have a clear understanding of us. Do more, work more, neglect myself more, and then, maybe just then, they will love me, approve of me, believe me, trust me. I have yet to find that to be true. Third part of debunking the great life myth, unpacking this idea. We have to stop and work through the overworking and neglecting of self. And the fourth component for today of unpacking the great life myth is hyper-independence and living in isolation. The ultimate belief that you can, just you with you, just you have the answers. You don't need help. As a matter of fact, you don't need anything. You have everything that you need, and so just do it for yourself and don't worry about anybody else. I will be strong and I will care and I will. We prioritize our independence over our interdependence. We take previous hurt, previous pain, previous past. We use it as a mechanism for protection, and in fact keeps others away from us when the thing we need most is interdependence. We create this overwhelming sense of independence. We feel like we're living our life on the outside, watching it happen to us. Because to have a great life, you have to grab yourself by the bootstraps, and it's just you with you. And I'm not telling you that there's not times that we have to dig deep. I'm not saying that there's not times that we have to look someplace else. I'm not telling you that there's not times where you're going to feel like it's just you with you and you got to get after it. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but to live a deep, full, meaningful, convictional life that has deep impact for those that you care about and a strong sense of self-worth, self-value, self-care, I believe requires heightened level of interdependence. The ability for us to be able to say, where am I and what am I doing and what is that like? Fourth part of unpacking the great life myth is the belief that we're going to do it all by ourselves. And thankfully that's just not true at all. So if these are the four components of the great life myth, or at least our four main components of the great life myth, how do we in fact begin to unpack that to create four new components? If we recognize we're going to rid ourselves of something and then replace it with something else, what do we want to replace it with? Well, I would implore you to say we would replace it. The first thing we would do is that we would replace it with a pause. Now, I know some of you are rolling your eyes and you think, Rocky, you want me to remove four things and replace it with space? And the answer to that is yes. See, for us to gain a level of clarity, I believe it requires a level of space. For us to gain a level of clarity, it requires a level of space. For us to be able to pause and assess what is. Many of us don't have the ability, many of you don't have the ability to make the decision that you want because you are so caught up in what you must do next, that you are forsaking the opportunity you were given today in hopes of the possibilities of what might occur tomorrow. And the possibilities of tomorrow are preventing you from taking action on the opportunity of today. And so I would ask for you to pause, to stop, to assess, to take a deep breath. Give yourself the kind of space required to determine what is, not what's good, not what's bad, not what's positive, not what's negative, but to ask yourself what is true? What is true about where I am at? What is true? Because before we can determine a value, we must determine what is. I would encourage you to determine what is. Step one, as we unpack the great life myth, is what do we replace in these four things? The first I would implore is a pause. The second thing I would say is to foster vulnerability. To foster vulnerability, to foster something, to grow something, to in fact give effort and energy towards something. Vulnerability being described as the creation of the opportunity to see and be seen by others. If we can pause long enough to assess what is true, then secondarily, can we be willing to be able to say, let me see who I am, and let me create the opportunity to see who you are and our capacity to foster vulnerability may in fact give way to our clarity on what it is that we actually want. See, knowing what we need to do is a direct reflection of our ability and capacity to understand who we are. It's the being versus the doing. I believe you know what to do. I believe you can go to YouTube and determine what to do. But the work and effort and energy is directly related to our capacity to be. Your capacity to be, to understand who you are and who you are becoming. And I don't know how we do that without fostering vulnerability. See, vulnerability is not simply the exposure of our weakness, but rather it's our greatest opportunity for growth. Being vulnerable says what I need. Being vulnerable says what I want. Being vulnerable says I am clear about where I am headed. I've quoted it many times. There's a book called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life by an author named Boyd Varty, V-A-R-T-Y. And he says in his book, as life relates to his journey, that often I do not know where I am going, but I do know exactly how I'm going to get there. That sticks in my brain somewhere. Sometimes life feels like I'm not sure where I am going, but I do know how I'm going to get there, and that's I am going to take the very singular next step. And you stack enough steps together, you've created a journey. We are so consumed by the destination that we miss the opportunity to take the next step. What step do you need to take? If you would be willing to foster vulnerability in yourself, simply answer this question: what do you need? What do you need? And the fourth component of a convictional, deep, great life, as we unpack the great life myth, we have paused and assessed. We have fostered vulnerability. The third step in that is the investment in self. The cultivation of self, the cultivation of our mindset, the cultivation of who we are. To be able to say, number one, pause. Number two, foster vulnerability. Number three, the investment in self. For us to have a great full life, there has to be an investment of self, because to be of service is the overflow of self and our desire to care for others. But if there is no investment in self, there is no overflow. It is solely the loss of self in hopes that you will love me. See, I think oftentimes we get confused. We think a great life is based on the amount of accolades and the accumulation of things that we could then stack up to say, look at all of these things, rather than saying, look at all of who I am. We spend an exorbitant amount of energy in the collection of things and a very minimal time in the investment of self. What are you doing and how are you investing in you? Engaging in things that are vital to us and the understanding. There's a level of relationship in that. There's a level of connection in that. There's a level of community in that. The capacity for us to be able to say, I'm going to invest in self, and therefore the fallout of that will be my ability to connect deeply with those around me. Pause, assess, foster vulnerability, invest in ourself, and the fourth component, the gaining of clarity in the pursuit of purposeful goals. We use the phrase, the pursuit of purposeful goals. There's a reason. See, the pursuit of just big goals is not valuable to you. The pursuit of just goals in general is not valuable to you, because if it was, you wouldn't feel how you feel and have accomplished so much. But it's the pursuit of purposeful goals, the goals that align with who we are, the goals that potentially are not an arrival, but rather a continuation. See, I find individuals that I have the ability to work with are most fulfilled when where they are going daily is as important, if not more, than where they hope they end up. Because my guess is, if you're listening now, where you are today is not where you thought you were going to be 36 months ago. For good, for bad, or indifferent, it is not where you thought it would be. Yet we expend so much time building this great life around these grandiose ideas about where we're going to land 3 years from now. And we spend very minimal time on pursuing purposeful goals about where we will step tomorrow. And we end up in an altogether different place. We say we have failed. And when we land in the place we thought we were going to land 3 years later, we feel behind. It's interesting how that works. To build a great life, meaningful life, convictional life, deep purpose life. First, pause. Foster vulnerability in yourself. Invest in yourself. And then and only then, when you are 75% of the way, begin to pursue purposeful goals that align with who you are. So Rocky, how do I align with who I am? How do I get to that place? How do I know who I am? I'm hearing you. I'm listening to you. It makes sense. I'm following it. Walk away from the accumulation of things. Walk away from the approval of people. Walk away from doing it by myself. Walk away from working harder, hoping I'll get there. Okay, you're asking me to pause. You're asking me to go inward. You're asking me to discover who I am and what do I want and what is my purpose. And if that's what you're going to ask me, then how do I even begin to discover and uncover who I am? In next week's episode, we're going to talk about identity mapping. It's our singular, longest running process we've ever had. Over a decade, we've taken tens of thousands of people through a process, and we are batting 1,000, my friends. Never had a person go through the identity mapping process that didn't walk away with the clearest language about who they are they had ever had. That's not because I have a magical power. It's because you know exactly who you are. You just need a guide to help you get there. So join us next week as we look through identity mapping. And as you spend the next 7 days beginning to unpack the great life myth for yourself, ask yourself, where am I accumulating things? Where am I looking for external validation? Where do I believe if I just do more, I might arrive? And where do I find myself in isolation? See, isn't it interesting if we use the upside down and just go through those 4 that many of us live in isolation, trying to do more, hoping that people will approve us so we can go buy some more things? It works in either direction. But what would happen? What would happen for you? Can you imagine a life where we did not live in isolation, try to do it by ourselves, by working harder in hopes to accumulate enough things to make us satisfied, and rather what we did was you woke up daily with a pause. You had the ability to say, I'm going to foster vulnerability in the reality of who I am and trust both what is true and good. I am then going to make sure that I invest in myself so that I can show up as the overflow and service to those around me so that I may in fact pursue purposeful goals. And that, my friend, I believe, is how we begin to move beyond success. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us. And as always, if you are interested in what we are doing, how you can be involved in our very next free event, make sure and check out rockygarza.com/beyond success. Again, that's rockygarza.com/beyond success. And we look forward to seeing you really soon.